Hello, 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 everybody. Thank you for joining us for another podcast episode of The Healing Place. I am excited about today's guest. We have a topic that I believe that many are actually dealing with, some who have healed from, some who has never ever talked about it. And I think today's topic is going to bless so many people. We're going to be talking about being on the healing journey from sexual abuse. And we have a very special guest on here today. I'm excited to hear his story. And I want you guys to take the time to share, comment, let us know your questions. And we will be so diligent to answer them as we can. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to our guest today, Rich. Rich, thank you for joining us. And if you can go ahead and just tell us who you are and tell us your story.
I want to thank you, Brianna, Pastor Brianna, for having me here today and giving me the opportunity to share this with people. And who am I? I am Rich Heller. I am with Rich in Relationship. We are an organization that helps families to have greater joy and resilience in their lives through learning to communicate more clearly with one another. Mm-hmm. And I created, not on my own, but with divine guidance, that organization was created about 5 years ago because my personal sense of purpose and mission in life is to help people to get in touch with their inner divinity and let that shine in every area of their life, particularly in the area of family.
Good. And it's much needed. So I appreciate you for the work that you're doing. And the healing, helping those who need it the most. So I know when we had actually recorded a podcast together on your show, and you were telling me a little bit about your story. And so if you could just open up as much as you feel led to about your story, so that we can help others that are actually dealing with this, because I actually came across someone who had a similar situation, and I just thought, and my heart just went out to them. So yeah. Go ahead and let you.
You know what? So what we're talking about is sexual abuse. Mm-hmm. And it's really interesting. I never thought of my story as sexual abuse until I started talking about it. And I guess it was about 2 months ago, I'm in a Toastmasters group, public speaking group. And the topic, I was asked and led to speak on a topic like an eye-opening experience. And so I had no idea what I was going to talk about. And I felt led to talk about this experience I had as a child. And I didn't realize until I shared it with this group, and I did the research, right? I didn't just, in Toastmasters, you don't just come out and talk. You think about, all right, what am I going to share? How am I going to frame this as a learning for other people? Mm-hmm. And because you always want it to be impactful. As a Toastmaster, as a public speaker, you always want to be impactful. And so I started to research this experience I had and discovered that it was technically a form of sexual abuse. And I had never really thought about it that way. And I started to uncover inner guilt and shame I had about it, even though I was the, quote, victim, unquote.
Yeah.
And so then we did our podcast interview and started talking about this. And so this is really, and in the beginning, before we got started, Brianna asked me, are you healed or healing? And I said, yes. I think I'm healed and healing. I mean, I didn't really know that I needed to be healed. Talking about it is healing. And there may be ways that I'm becoming healed that I'm unaware of. And so let's get to the story.
Yes.
The story goes like this. When I was about 11 years old, maybe 12 years old, I grew up in New York City in Manhattan. And at that age, there were not a lot of concerns about kids going out and doing things on their own. Kids played on the street. There was not a lot of organized sports. I used to go out into the park and play, pick up baseball, pick up football, whatever. Like we'd just go out and play. Or that was just how it was done. And there was not any adult supervision, or if there were adult supervision, it was fleeting and short. So one day I went out to the park and I met a new group of boys. And I thought, oh, how cool, opportunity to make new friends. And one of them says to me, hey, we got a knife. Do you want to see it? I was fascinated with knives. Like I was all about Daniel Boone and Davy Crockett. And I thought knives were the coolest thing. And my parents would not let me have one. Right. So I thought, fantastic. I was like, yeah, I want to see it. And so we go off into this area near this playground that I grew up in my whole life, but a little shielded from it, but close enough so you could hear the kids playing. You know, it's all kind of normal. This is my park. I grew up in this park. I know every inch, right? The area we're going, I have played on every rock. I like totally, for me, it's a safe environment. And this boy says, okay, we're going to show you the knife. Kneel down. And I do. And next thing you know, he's unzipping his pants. And, you know, I didn't know what to make of it. Like no one had ever done that. I didn't know what's up with that. And there's I'm going to spare you the graphics. You know, the punchline is there was an older boy next to me and I'm looking up to him like, when do I get to see the knife? You know, and finally the older boy steps in and like says, yeah, look, this is enough. Like I stand up and he shows me the knife. And like it's all like normal. I didn't think anything of it. I thought the other boy was a little strange, revealing himself to me and all that good stuff. I didn't really understand, you know, any of it. And, you know, I guess the audience needs to know there's no action taken on my part. I'm just there going, WTF, you know, pardon my language, but like, what's going on here? Yeah. So, you know, we get the knife and I play with it and I start whittling with the wood. There's trust there, right? They hand me the knife, right? I'm using it, as if it's normal, and then it moves on. And I never thought about this again, really, until later in life. I was like, wow, that was a really strange thing that happened. And when I did this speech for Toastmasters, I realized that I was carrying, negative emotion around it, and it's something I prayed about, and that talking about it is healing. Mm-hmm. And so here we are talking about this thing. Yeah. And so and tell me again, what age were you? I was 12. And I think what the audience needs to know is that sexual abuse is not necessarily an act. It can be simple exposure. Mm-hmm. Like back then, by the way, it was not uncommon for people to be like exposing themselves in public and masturbating on subway trains. And I mean, as sad as that is, that was a pretty common thing. My wife was a young lady growing up in Manhattan and had plenty of these. She has been sexually abused in plenty of ways, but back then it was common. Mm-hmm. Now it's seriously frowned on. Not that it wasn't frowned on then, but nobody did anything about it. Yeah. And I think that's the sad part, because so many people grew up being sexually assaulted, being sexually abused within the homes or within peers, and peers who had been sexually assaulted at home just took it out into their world and did the same thing, the same crime to somebody else. And so we have a lot of adults who have kind of blocked this out of their mind and not realizing that some of the things or some of the ways that they're acting is because of the act that was perpetrated on them. Mm-hmm. And I think that it has, unconsciously, it has a lot of impact. More so because this was a buried experience for the most part. I think it has an impact unconsciously when you're walking around with kind of guilt and shame about something that you had no control over. It impacts every time I'm in a sexual experience, right? Yeah. It had an impact, and since this revelation, I'm doing work in releasing that. Mm-hmm. Right? We got to let go of the baggage and move on. Yeah. So if you can talk about some of the emotions, I know you talk about, you were saying guilt and shame during your experiences as a grown man now. What were some of the things that you feel that experience you took into the bedroom? Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think that in many ways I felt inhibited in the bedroom, with my wife. Not that we didn't have an active sex life, but we got like a passel of children and everything, which is, let's face it, the primary purpose of that act, though we don't like to talk about that often. The pleasure part's good, like, thank you, Lord, for that experience. And, it is procreation, not just pro-joyation.
Uh-huh.
pro sexation,
Yeah.
it is procreation. But I feel like that image like haunted me, in the back of my mind. And, now that it's kind of out in the open, I notice that I feel freer in the bedroom. And I want to be clear. I feel like being too graphic might not be appropriate. It might not be appropriate. And so
Yeah.
I'm doing my best to stay within what I feel like are proper social boundaries.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's fine.
We're
Because
running a sex show here, right?
oh, right, right. And we are, whatever you're comfortable with is fine. My audience is we talk, there's no hold bar. There's no holds bar on our podcast. So we tend to talk about just whatever. It's whatever you're comfortable with, so which is fine. I know that I have spoken to, and I know my normal practice is that I don't normally counsel men, but I do counsel men in another way, if I can say that. So it's normally where I get in conversations with them, and they begin to talk, and for whatever the reason, the atmosphere is always conducive for them to feel free to talk. And so when I speak to men that have been the act wasn't actually performed, or you didn't, what I'm trying to say.
We participate fully and completely.
So some men that have actually had the actual act done, the oil, the penetration and things, or just the playing around, it has affected them in a way where at one point in time or another, if they're not presently dealing with this, they have they're kind of confused with what gender should they go with, because of what they had to experience. Am I making sense?
Yeah, I think that I was very fortunate in that I did have that older boy looking on, and when I would look at him, I could see he was conflicted,
Mm-hmm.
and that and I think God was watching over me in that moment, if I'm honest,
Yeah.
because I was spared a lot of that. But I will say this, that there was a period in my life where I was a very active substance user.
Mm-hmm.
There were times where I was confused about the incident, and I wondered if I remembered it correctly.
Yeah.
Since I've done work like with therapists and with pastors, that memories become very clear and
Mm-hmm.
crisp. But in those periods of doubt, I would what would accompany that would be, well, gee, I wonder, was there something did I draw this into my life because I'm gay, right?
Yeah.
Is what I would wonder. Now, I never, the way that I worked through that was I gave myself permission.
Mm-hmm.
This is like not as a Christian, but even post meeting Jesus, I gave myself permission that if I felt attracted to men, I would act on it, and that never came up. And
Mm-hmm.
so that sort of reinforced me, that I'm created to be with women, and that's where my interest is.
Mm-hmm.
And the blessing of that has been that I have not walked in judgment of homosexuals as a Christian.
Yeah.
That because I allowed myself to be open to the possibility that
Mm-hmm.
something I wanted, I have not walked in judgment of them. And I believe when Jesus walks among us today, however that happens, that he doesn't judge, that he's, just like he didn't judge prostitutes and tax collectors, he doesn't judge people who are interested in same-sex experiences, but he is always calling.
Mm-hmm.
There's always the opportunity to make yourself right with him. And so, I feel really blessed that I don't have a fear about that, and that I don't have I think that in some way, maybe that experience was given to me so that I could be a resource.
Mm-hmm. And I'm sure it was. I believe that nothing happens in life.
Makes good of the bad.
He does.
That is the promise.
Yeah, because nothing happens in life that he doesn't take and use for the greater good of us and for him to get the glory. I believe that most people who have been molested or sexually abused a lot of times go into being promiscuous. Did you experience that?
Oh, for sure. But I have, I'm also a child of divorce. I've like multiple times. I'm a trauma survival on multiple levels. Like this experience from a traumatic experience point of view was pretty low.
Mm-hmm.
There's like all kinds of trauma I've suffered in all kinds of other ways that are much more impactful. And all of those things, when I read about them, contribute to drug and alcohol use and sexual promiscuity and all that. Like the statistics on divorce, which is my one field I work in, are that the first year after the divorce is finished, children are most at risk for drug and alcohol abuse, sexual promiscuity, and even suicide. And certainly the first year after my parents' divorce, I engaged heavily in sexual promiscuity, drug and alcohol use, not quite suicide, though I was known to hang out of a 12-story window and think about it. I never actually let go. So, all of that came up for me, but I think that has more to do with the level of emotional violence and even physical violence that was occurring in my home than that experience in the park. Like that experience in the park, next to what was going on between the two people that I trusted the most and whose hands my life was in, what I feel was like a 9, and that thing in the park is like a 4 or a 5 comparatively,
Yeah. And so if we can dive into that just a little bit, as much as you want to share. But so when the incident happened in the park, so I'm sure it made it hard for you to even go home and talk to your parents about it.
I never told anyone about it, in the same way. And I think it's because we don't know. And this is where my Toastmasters speech went. Nobody told me about that this stuff happened. Nobody ever asked me, hey, how was it? What goes on in the park? No, there was never any of that was ever laid out. In the same way that no one ever prepared me for what violence in the house looks like, or emotional violence, or pathological lying, or betrayal, or all the things that were commonplace in my childhood. No one prepared me for that. And so the thing that we want to do with our children is we want to make them aware that there are predators out there and how to say no. And we want to encourage them to talk about experiences that may feel shameful or secretive to them. And I didn't even realize that I had negative feelings about it. To me, I just completely encapsulated that feeling like I would encapsulate the feelings about my parents, and in the work that I've done, I've uncovered all that stuff about my parents. And so no wonder this finally has come to the top. In life, we unveil the greater traumas first, or peel the onion, and then we get down to and that this is a lower trauma is sad, but that it finally gets to be revealed is awesome. And so in order to protect our children from these things, we need to have regular communication with them. We need to talk to them about who to trust and how to trust and when to trust and when not to trust and what to talk about and who to talk to about it. And these are all really important conversations, so that what to do, when these situations come. If you're with a group of strange people, you know to maintain safe boundaries, not just that every rock and blade of grass and bush, and I think part of what saved me was that the playground was nearby and all I needed to do was cry out. But no one ever said to me, hey, if you're in the park with a bunch of strangers and somebody's unzipping their pants, you need to cry out. All right. That's the other thing, is our children need to learn to scream, whether it's in terror or anger, they need to let it out. I was honestly confused and somewhat terrified in that moment. And had I known that it was okay, that maybe I would have gotten cuffed in the head or something, but they all would have run away. Back then people weren't stabbing each other much. It was years later, it was probably about 4 or 5 years later in my neighborhood that people actually started cutting each other.
Oh, wow. And I'm sitting here and I'm listening to you talk, and what's popping up in my spirit is that, what happened to you, it set a imagery in your mind. That's just like when I hear stories of children who are set down in front of the TV, or they walk in on their parent or their uncle or whoever watching pornography. So the act is not happening to them, but the imagery in their mind it stays there, and it gives them a negative view of what sex is, or even if they don't understand at the time what they're looking at, as they grow up and they begin to understand that that was sex that I watched. And so their view on sex, or how it makes them feel when they have it, it can go left or right for them. And so, again, having that foundation of knowing what is and what's not. And I don't believe that it's ever too early to talk to our children about right and wrong when it comes down to sex and the things that you should be doing at this age and things of that nature. A lot of times parents don't like to have those conversations. Go ahead.
And it doesn't even necessarily need to be about sex. It really, the conversation to be had, and this is one I'm still learning, is to trust your own feelings.
Right.
Now, if it doesn't feel right, then you leave or you ask for help. If it's something it feels off, you honor that feeling. Don't in that moment when they said, "Hey, all right, let's go look at this somewhere else." Something felt off to me, but I didn't trust myself. And I was more interested in having new friends and seeing the knife and having this forbidden experience that my parents had not allowed me. That was more important to me than honoring a troubled spirit experience in my heart or my spirit or whatever you want to call it. And I think what we really need to teach our children is to honor that feeling in ourselves, because our unconscious mind, that that always knows what feels right. It always knows.
Yeah, and it does. And I think sometimes, majority of the time, because you were with friends, and so in that situation,
they were new friends. These were
friends.
And kids for the first time.
Yeah, and I think that's a big thing now, especially with the headlines with this young girl who went away with friends and came back in a box. I think we need to talk to our children about who's a friend and who's not a friend. Understanding, you just don't go up to people and call them your friends. But I wanted to more so, because a lot of times these situations are happening within people that we tell our children they're supposed to trust. So even though when you get the feeling of, oh, something's not right, but mommy told me I could trust this person, or daddy told me I can trust this person, or it's actually the parent that is being the perpetrator. And so, our children have to, and I think we as a people, period, when you are working in human service and you have the opportunity to sow in seeds of, letting children know that sitting on laps when you feel uncomfortable, and it's somebody that you're told that's supposed to be safe, being that person that they can run to for safety, because I can't run to my parent if it's my parent. I can't run to my parent if it's Uncle Joe and mommy told me to trust Uncle Joe because I don't feel comfortable telling mommy. And so us as a village, as a people, I believe we just need to do more collectively when we have the opportunities to do so.
Yeah, I listen in what you said, what it sounds like you're saying is there are levels of trust. And often as parents, we fail to communicate about levels of trust. And I think it's because, in the same way that I'm uncomfortable talking about the sex act on your podcast, we're uncomfortable talking about the sex act to our children. So my thing, I don't know, it may or may not be an inhibition, or it may be just an idea I have about that. But with our children, there can be no restriction. They at some point, if they're 4, they won't understand it. Yeah. If they're 12 or 13, they will. But what they will understand from the ages of 0 to 7, let me back up. So I keep talking about the unconscious mind. Mm-hmm. So for the listeners, the unconscious mind is like 90% of who we are. 10% is conscious. The other 90% is unconscious. The 10% that's conscious, that's the part that talks with words and that is reasoning and rational. The other 90% is like programs. It's strategies for approaching life. It's all image and emotion driven, no words. Right. So from 0 to 7, the unconscious mind is forming. And that studies show that children, by the way, they're like in terms of brain waves, they're operating at a completely different level than adults from 0 to 7. They're just absorbing. So at 0 to 7, you can talk about sex to them all day long, but that might actually be a violation. of where they are developmentally. But what you can talk to them about is what we were just talking about. You can talk to them about trust and when to trust and when not to trust and how to be cautious about trusting. And from 0 to 7, you want to have these conversations because you are directly implanting in them the system or the strategy is a better word for life, right? All their strategies for life are the basic strategies are imprinted from 0 to 7. They can now later on in life we can adjust and change them, but it's a lot more work, right? Yeah. 0 to 7, this basic program is going in. So you want to have conversations with them about what's safe, what's not safe, what to do when you don't feel safe, how to honor yourself when you don't feel safe. Even if, and it might be that you're wrong, it might be totally safe, but you honor that feeling and what to do when that feeling comes up. Really, really, really important conversation to have with them to 0 to 7. 7 to 12, you're on a whole other planet. Right? 7 to 12 or 5 to 12, children's conscious mind is really starting to develop more. Right? That's not happening at 0 to 7. 0 to 7 is all about developing strategies and programs. And they're part of that, they're taking from the way you act and the way you talk. So when you have guilt and shame about something, that imprints on them directly. When you are emotionally abusive, that imprints on them directly. So it's not just what we say, it's how we act. Right. And I'm just thinking about my own parents and myself. I mean, honestly, there's all kinds of crap I imprinted on my children without thinking about it until it was too late. And I'm still in service to them for that today, demonstrating how it can be if they so choose to look at it. All right. 7 to 12, conscious mind. That's when we can start to talk more about situations and they're going to grasp it better. All right. So at 12 years old, I was right there at that age, but nobody had told me about this stuff. And somebody had told me, there's things that people do with their bodies that maybe you need to know about. Like I might have been more prepared for that. Or there's people may want to, you don't even have to talk to them about the sex act, but you can talk to them about what it means to have a boundary around your own body and what it means to have boundaries around other people's bodies and what is and is not okay in your opinion. You can have that. If someone's taking off their clothes around you and it's not a locker room, it might not be so good. If they're taking their clothes off in the locker room and they start engaging you personally, that's not okay. You can start talking about situations to them without talking about intercourse or without talking about fellatio. Or you can do all that without going there if that's uncomfortable for you, and feel free to, because your children need to hear about it. And so that's why I keep talking about the unconscious mind and the conscious mind and what to talk about and what not to talk about. And if you're not comfortable, then find a way to talk about the subject in a way where they start to develop an understanding of who to go to when and not to keep it to themselves.
Yes, I know.
It's like my biggest sticking point is I walked around with this thing buried. I'm 63. I walked with this thing buried for 50 some odd years. Every now and then it would come up and I'd look at it and go, what the hell was that? Well, I didn't think any of it. And then I'd tuck it back down, and I'm only now really blessing people with my experience so that they can learn from it when, this could have been a blessing to people at a much earlier age.
Oh, yeah.
Because no one ever taught me how to talk about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I had a conversation with a couple of friends and when we were talking about how growing up in a home with a certain generation of parents where it was be quiet, listen to me, don't express yourself, I don't want to hear it, things like that. So we're not taught to a certain generation of parenting. They did not teach us how to articulate ourselves. I know raising my children, especially my daughter, I would oftentimes ask her, does this make you feel uncomfortable? How does that make you feel? I would look at certain family members and although I know that it was just an expression of love, I wanted to know how it made her feel. How does that make you feel? Do you like that? And then as she began to get older and get taller, a lot of times we want to take the children, we want to embrace them from the front. And I began to teach her, men, when you're hugging, make sure you hug from the side, baby. Don't let nobody hug you from the front.
Mm-hmm.
As she began to get bigger, no more sitting on laps. No, you're not going to sit on laps. You don't get to come and if it's a male and you're running in between their legs, let's not do that anymore. So we had things like that, those type of conversations before, because I understood that as she got older and she began to develop, and it's a natural, sometimes it's just a natural thing for men to get aroused. It doesn't mean that they're trying to molest your child or things like that. It's just a natural thing. And so let's not even put yourself in that situation. Of course, I didn't express that portion of it, but I knew the reasons of me telling her to do certain things as she got older.
And I think the other side of the conversation is that that sexuality is a God-given gift.
Mm-hmm.
They're all sexual beings at all ages, right? Like I have a granddaughter, who for a while there, wanted to dry hump my leg. And I was just like, you know what? I'm not comfortable with that, right? Like that may be good for you, but that's not so good for me. And now she doesn't do that anymore, and hopefully she's not doing that to other guys either, but I didn't sit there and go, oh my God, that sinful little creature, she's just exploring like a natural feeling and emotion. And helping her to separate out what's okay and what's not is important conversation.
Yeah. And you're right. I used to work in a daycare, and at 3, you would find children actually masturbating.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like
my best friend's son. The teacher called him in because he's 5. He was touching himself, and he didn't know what he had was doing. He's just comforting himself. Oh, this feels, I'm uncomfortable. This comforts me. And so she was shocked, or it seemed like, because of her particular religious background. Doesn't matter what it was. But when they had a conversation about it, it turns out she understood, and she just wanted him to be aware, and actually he was shocked. He was like, oh my God, my son's touching himself. And I said, dude, I've got 6 kids. They all touched themselves. They touched themselves when they had diapers, they touched themselves when they were in the bathtub, and it's just about sharing with them that at a certain point, they need to understand that other people might not be so comfortable with that. And there's a time and place for that. There's a time and place where that's okay. I mean, and in public, maybe not so much,
Yeah. So I thank you for coming on here and sharing your story and being so open with us.
Well, I need to give you one more thing before we go. I need to give the audience one more thing. So if you are someone who has been through this kind of experience, all right, get that even though you haven't been thinking about it, it's impactful. And so I hinted at that, in the bedroom with my wife today, even, I'm learning to not have this experience recede into the background is probably the best way to put it, so that our sexual expression to one another is more free and more open, or and less influence, and so it's something I pray about. It's something I'm releasing unconsciously in my work with others, and not that it was a major inhibitor, but once I became aware of it, I noticed it's a presence. It's a present in my bedroom. And I don't want anyone else in my bedroom, right? Right. I want it to be a free exchange of love between 2 people who are committed and care for one another, right? That's the gift of that. And so it's important, even if you think that you've had an experience like I was sharing, my wife saw people masturbating on the subway all the time. If you've had an experience like that, and it feels uncomfortable, the chances are there's something that you need to do with it to be comfortable with it. Right? And not that you should think that every day you ride on the subway or whatever, that you're going to see that and be okay with it, but more that you're okay with having had the experience. Part of the healing or being healed, whatever it is talking about it. Part of the healing and getting comfortable with it is just acknowledging, all right, what are the little ways it has impacted me? Or maybe there's some major ways it's impacted me. And if that stuff is in the way of our interacting with people we love, then it's a form of sin, because if it's getting in the way of expression of love is what walking in Christ is all about. Right. So we want to always be expressing love freely, effectively, and appropriately, or like however that shows up for you. So if you have discomfort around this, find someone to talk to. If you have discomfort around some event that from your childhood, even if it was sitting in your uncle's lap and noticing that there was something else there besides his leg, and you were like, and that made you uncomfortable. You want to pray about it. You want to talk to others about it and be okay with it. Be comfortable enough you can't release it if there's guilt. You can't release it if there's shame. You can't release it if there's discomfort. Part of the letting go is releasing those emotions also. So just that's the last thing I want to say about it is if you've had this experience, do not wait 50 some odd years to talk about it, because there's so much of life to be lived.
Yes, it is. It is. And like you said, in the unconscious mind, it's just a connection piece. So even in the bedroom, if you get ready to do the thing that you saw years ago that made you feel nasty and uncomfortable, and guilt and shame come, that it's just going to just spill all the way over into the bedroom where,
For me, it showed up more as an oral fixation than not repelled, but like so. So in my bedroom, it's about being open to all kinds of touch and experience and being less focused on that.
Yeah, yeah. And I don't know if the audience remembers, but we had a counselor, sex expert, and we talked about being married and and having sexual experiences and some of the cliches and the things that we were taught, and how we can bring that into the bedroom and how to heal and things of that nature. So there, again, intimacy is normal. God created us for intimacy, but the enemy comes in to try to make it, to try to pervert it, and
That's right.
it's not to do it the way that God has created us to do it. So there's nothing wrong with talking about it. I think the church has just put so much, added so much baggage on it, so it makes it uncomfortable for people to really sit down and talk about it, whether from whatever spectrum you want to talk, you need to talk about it from whether it was a bad experience, molestation, or whether it was just, I've heard these things, and now that I'm married, I'm bringing this stuff into the bedroom, and it's causing friction within my marriage.
Yeah, I think this is a great topic. We're going to start talking about it on my podcast, which is Rich in Relationship. If you look for it in all different platforms, it's in Apple and Google and Spotify, and but we're going to start talking about this more. But I think that also the reason why I'm so careful about how I talk about it is I think that this can become pornographic.
It can.
So I'm really careful about how I talk about sex, not because I don't honor it, not because I don't love it, but I always want to make sure that when I'm talking about it, I'm not crossing over into the line of a graphic experience that's not helpful to people. And I'm still figuring out where is that line, right? Yeah. How much of this is my own? I didn't grow up in a time of. I grew up in a time where there was more sexual freedom than there should have been. And there was, so I'm still finding that boundary. So audience, if I have been too careful, I apologize. If I've been overly graphic for you, I apologize. I'm still figuring this thing out. And also, if you have questions about this, please feel free to email me. If you have questions about my experience, or, you can direct message me through Brianna, obviously, or through this podcast, or may I give my email?
Yes, please give them all your contact information, because I would like for them, if they want to reach out to you for any of your services, they know how to.
So my email is Rich, RICH, at my website, richinrelationship.com, RICHINRELATIONSHIP.com. So you can email me there, or you can go to the website and hit the contact us form. You can find our podcasts and all of our good information there. This topic is, I've done a lot of couples work, and oddly, we've been kind of dancing around this stuff right here. Maybe not so odd given my own encapsulating of it, but this is going to become, though we don't do sex therapy, and I know a lot of really good sex therapists, by the way, I do think the conversation about sex and intimacy, or really we're talking about intimacy. Mm-hmm. The topic is intimacy, how it shows up physically and how it shows up in the rest of our lives. Mm-hmm. That is super relevant to relationships, and we're going to explore that more in depth. And what are the inhibitors to intimacy? Certainly, if you are sexually abused through contact or just through a visual experience, that's going to have some kind of impact, and it's worth exploring.
Yes, it is. I think it's very, very important. Now, I have been screaming just about and telling people that one of the number one reasons for people to get divorced is intimacy, whether it's in the bedroom or just intimacy, because intimacy goes way further than just the bedroom. And so if you are not healthy in that area, it is going to really be a big damper on your marriage, because we get married for intimate. We are in relationship for intimacy, whether it's friendship, because if you talk about just being a friend, there's times where there's levels to intimacy in a friendship that you're going to need. But if you're uncomfortable with comforting people, because the way that you were comforted, in a prior experience that brought on guilt and shame, then you're going to be uncomfortable comforting just a regular friend.
And so the audience knows this kind of experience can be the emotional baggage around this kind of that prevents intimacy. Forget about this kind of experience. This might be part of it, can be released very quickly. I'm working with a couple right now in this area. We've got a process called the mental and emotional release technique, which is an 8-hour process where we explore it in depth, air out everything that's related to it. And then we go through a process where the unconscious mind actually lets go of the emotion. And I believe this is guided by the Holy Spirit, absolutely and completely, because I think what the Holy Spirit wants in us is it wants us to be as clear and congruent with our own values as possible. And when we have emotional baggage, that's when we start compromising one value for another, and we start getting incongruent with those values. And so this mental and emotional release process for me is like a God-given gift to help people become congruent with their values and what they want, and increase intimacy with themselves, with Jesus, and in their marriage, of course. And reach out and learn more about this. We're just starting to do this over here. It's an awesome technique.
I'm glad that you have started something like that, because I think a lot of people do need a safe space to be able to heal and journey and process some things in their life. And again, I thank you for joining us. I thank you for sharing your story. I really appreciate you. I honor you. Audience, please don't forget to reach out to Rich for his services. You can find him at the avenues that he has given you, and it will be posted on the link. We will have links posted on our Facebook page and on our podcast page. So again, thank you guys. And remember that, as always, I am praying for you and I love you. Until next time, continue to be on your soul's journey.